the uneasy summer that followed the death of Augustus, the Roman world held its breath, uncertain whether the peace, so carefully constructed over decades, would endure or fracture beneath the weight of ambition and memory. And into this moment stepped Tiberius, a man seasoned in war yet reluctant in spirit, a ruler who valued discipline over display and law over spectacle, inheriting not only an empire, but the impossible shadow of Augustus, whose long reign had accustomed Rome to stability guided by a single will. Yet even before the funeral pyres cooled, another name stirred more excitement in the streets and barracks alike, and that name was Germanicus, the young general of dazzling lineage. Descended from both the Julian and Claudian houses, nephew and adopted son within the imperial family, husband to Agrippina the Elder, father to a growing brood that symbolized continuity, and above all, a commander adored by his soldiers for sharing their hardships and speaking to them not as tools of conquest, but as men whose loyalty deserved respect. When news of Augustus's death reached the Rhine legions in 14 CE, discipline cracked like ice under sudden thaw. For the soldiers, hardened by years of frontier duty in the forests of Germania, feared forgotten promises and endless service, and they erupted into mutiny, demanding higher pay, shorter terms, and justice for abuses endured under harsh centurions. Germanicus found himself at the center of chaos, surrounded by armed men who could at any moment proclaim him emperor, a temptation that history had proven fatal to republics and kingdoms alike. Yet instead of seizing the purple or crushing dissent with bloodshed, he attempted negotiation, speaking from a tribunal with measured urgency, reminding them of their oath to Rome and to Tiberius, even as he privately understood that his own popularity made every gesture suspect in the eyes of the new princeps. The crisis escalated when the mutineers, inflamed by rumor, threatened violence against their officers and even against Germanicus's own family, forcing him into desperate theatrics, at one point offering his own life as sacrifice to restore order until eventually discipline returned, through a mixture of concessions and renewed campaigns against Germanic tribes. Campaigns that carried Roman eagles deep beyond the Rhine in a display of vengeance for the catastrophic defeat of Varus years earlier. Villages burned, alliances shifted, and lost standards were recovered, each victory magnifying Germanicus's legend, while paradoxically deepening Tiberius's unease, for triumphs that enriched Rome also elevated a rival narrative that perhaps the young commander embodied the vigor of Augustus more vividly than the reigning emperor did. Officially, Tiberius recalled him because the strategic objectives had been met, and Rome had little appetite for endless expansion into inhospitable forests. Yet whispers in taverns and porticos suggested another motive: that an emperor secure in his authority does not fear the cheers of soldiers, but one haunted by comparison might. When Germanicus returned to Rome and celebrated a triumph, the spectacle dazzled the populace, his chariot rolling beneath arches of laurel as captives marched and spoils glittered. And for a moment, unity seemed possible, the princeps honoring his heir apparent before the assembled Senate and people. Nevertheless, politics in Rome rarely rested on public ceremony alone. The Senate itself was divided between ancient aristocratic houses, heirs to the old optimates who valued tradition and senatorial prerogative, and newer families elevated under Augustus, whose fortunes were tied to imperial favor, factions that had learned to bow publicly, yet maneuver privately, and Tiberius, with his stoic belief in procedure, attempted to revive genuine deliberation, refusing to dictate outcomes as Augustus often had, believing, perhaps too sincerely, that the machinery of republican governance could operate impartially if only given space. Yet his silence bred confusion, for senators trained to seek imperial signals now scrambled to interpret absence as hidden instruction, and when Tiberius intervened after decisions displeased him, critics labeled the correction tyranny. Into this climate stepped Germanicus once more, dispatched eastward with sweeping authority over provinces beyond the Adriatic, a commission that appeared both honor and exile, granting him prestige while removing him from Rome's volatile center. Accompanying this assignment was the appointment of a new governor of Syria, Gnaeus Calpurnius Piso, a man of stern republican temperament who viewed the young prince with suspicion and perhaps resentment, convinced he had been sent as counterbalance, if not watchdog. From the outset, their relationship curdled, for Germanicus's style, walking among Greek cities with minimal escort, adopting local customs to win affection, struck Piso as theatrical and dangerously monarchic, while Piso's blunt criticisms and swift replacement of officers in Syria signaled open defiance. Letters traveled between camps and Rome, each side interpreting the other's actions through lenses polished by distrust. In Armenia, Germanicus deftly installed a client king acceptable to both Rome and Parthia, projecting diplomatic finesse that momentarily stabilized the frontier. Yet in Syria, Piso countermanded orders, relaxed discipline, and cultivated loyalty among legions, creating a parallel authority that suggested not mere disagreement, but rivalry for influence. Tensions sharpened when Germanicus journeyed to Egypt, drawn by famine relief and administrative oversight, entering Alexandria in Greek attire, to thunderous applause from crowds who saw in him a Hellenistic benefactor rather than a distant Roman magistrate. However, Egypt was no ordinary province, but the personal domain of the emperor, its grain vital to Rome's survival, and Augustus had decreed that senators must not enter without explicit permission, a mandate Tiberius regarded with near religious reverence. Upon learning of the visit, Tiberius bristled, perceiving not humanitarian initiative, but breach of sacred boundary, another instance where admiration for Germanicus collided with imperial authority. Soon after, illness struck the young commander. He recovered briefly, then relapsed amid rumors of curses and poisoned drafts. Accusations whispered against Piso, and even against darker forces at Rome's heart, and as his condition worsened, he formally renounced friendship with the Syrian governor, declaring belief that treachery had cut him down. On October 10th, 19 CE, far from the capital yet at the center of its imagination, Germanicus died, only 33, leaving behind a grieving wife and children whose very existence embodied future claims. His final words reportedly urged restraint, counseling Agrippina against reckless pursuit of power. But grief rarely listens to prudence. When news reached Rome, the city convulsed in mourning and suspicion, statues draped in black, crowds gathering in forums to demand justice, and many eyes turned not only toward Piso, but toward Tiberius and his formidable mother Livia, for in times of tragedy conspiracy blooms easily, especially when public affection for the deceased outshines loyalty to the living ruler. Piso returned under guard to face trial before a Senate pressured by an angry populace clamoring for condemnation. Prosecutors painted a portrait of calculated insubordination, escalating to murder through poison and sorcery, while defenders struggled against the tide of emotion, and Tiberius, wary of appearing either protector or persecutor, refused to preside directly, urging senators to judge without regard for imperial influence, a plea that rang hollow amid chants outside demanding blood. Before verdict could be pronounced, Piso was found dead, his throat cut in what was declared suicide, though skeptics questioned whether despair or silencing hand guided the blade. His wife received clemency, reportedly at Livia's request. further fueling murmurs that power shielded the guilty. Instead of closure, the trial widened fractures between emperor and senate, between palace and people, for many Romans believed justice incomplete and suspicion unresolved, and Tiberius, increasingly disillusioned with the hostility of public life, withdrew gradually from the capital's daily rhythms, allowing new figures to accumulate influence in the vacuum. Among them rose Sejanus, ambitious prefect of the Praetorian Guard, who would later exploit imperial isolation to orchestrate treason trials that drenched the Senate in fear. Yet the seed of that era lay partly in the mistrust sown by Germanicus's death. In retrospect, historians debate whether Tiberius truly feared his adopted son or merely sought orderly governance undermined by perception. Whether Germanicus's charisma would have translated into wise rule or succumbed to the same corrosive pressures that haunt absolute power, what remains undeniable is that his early demise crystallized him into legend, a symbol of lost potential against which subsequent emperors were measured. The story is not simply of rivalry, but of structural tension within a regime that called itself a restored republic while functioning as monarchy, where every successful general carried the aura of alternative authority, and every popular heir threatened the delicate balance between consent and command. Germanicus's campaigns in Germania restored honor, yet revived memories of expansionist glory that Tiberius considered strategically unsound. His diplomacy in the East soothed frontiers, yet challenged hierarchies of decision. His visit to Egypt relieved famine, yet breached constitutional taboo. And his death, whether by natural illness or intrigue, a narrative of martyrdom that no imperial decree could extinguish. As years passed and Tiberius retreated to Capri, governing through correspondence, while paranoia intensified in Rome, the contrast between the withdrawn emperor and the vibrant image of the fallen prince sharpened in collective memory, shaping accounts by later writers who portrayed one as brooding tyrant and the other as virtuous hero. Though reality likely dwelt in subtler shades, empires often hinged less on singular acts than on perceptions of legitimacy. And in the saga of Germanicus, we witness how admiration can destabilize authority as effectively as rebellion, how grief can erode trust more swiftly than defeat, and how the interplay of personality and institution determines whether succession secures continuity or seeds crisis. In the end, the Roman Empire endured beyond both men. Yet the shadow cast by that young general's funeral procession lingered, a reminder that in Rome glory was never merely reward,